Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the Library Tour of Doom. A library tour unlike any other, a library tour in which we go through the books in my library, book by book, day by day, forever. You might think, well, surely it won't be forever. Yes, it'll take a long time, but not forever. But I'm constantly adding books to my collection, so it's forever. It's a death sentence. And our book today is a little bit on the tedious side, but I'm not picking and choosing. I'm not exercising any kind of control or rationale here. I'm just going with what I happen to see, what's near my hand, what's the mood strikes me, and the only casualty of that is you. So today is from 1908. This is Present Day Problems by William Howard Taft. This volume was given to me by a friend of mine back in 2005. And this is a collection of addresses and speeches that William Howard Taft gave in the course of his time as a cabinet officer for President Roosevelt, or his time in office himself. He was a very careful speaker, very lively. He could be very lively, especially his opening and closing remarks, which, typical of him, he didn't tend to include in the written versions, so they're not. Most of them are lost to history. But he could often have a crowd laugh its head off before he bored them silly with the speech itself. These speeches are full of perfectly rounded Ciceronian periods of a type that scan perfectly and work wonderfully as dicta from the bench, but don't typically work well as speeches, and they don't typically work well as reading material either. You have to be interested in William Howard Taft, his time period, the Panama Canal, the administration of 1909 or not. You have to be interested in that kind of thing to find a whole lot to keep you going in this volume. And I don't think this volume is in print anymore. I'm pretty sure that this volume, probably more than any other, had a fairly wide circulation, and I'd be willing to bet there are copies out there in the collectibles market that were signed by Taft, because people used to, when he would be out to dinner or he would be at some sort of a rubber chicken event, people used to bring him books to sign. It wasn't a common thing, but it did happen. They used to bring him his own books to sign, and he would always just dutifully do that. He would sign his name, he'd usually date them, the time when he was doing the signature and whatnot. And I'd be willing to bet that there are copies of this thing out there. I don't think this had a dust jacket. I'm pretty sure this is the way it looked. But one way or another, this is a collection of various things. If he went to an anniversary or of the Grant Society or something like that, he would give an overview of sort of a historical appreciation of Ulysses S. Grant. That's in here. If it was a diplomatic type thing, he would talk about Panama, or he would talk about the Philippines where he was governor, and the time of the Philippines under United States oversight. And probably his favorite topic of all was to talk about the administration of the United States government, what the United States government is legally, morally, ethically, practically. And it was a heartbreak to all of his friends how that there was such a gap between how fascinating he could be on that subject over dinner or surrounded by friends, and how less than fascinating he tends to be on the written page on those same subjects. It's the inner judge in him, which was never far from the surface, always takes over when he's writing, and the writings come out therefore as opinions of the court rather than as utterances of a man, an incredibly intelligent and passionately interested, upright, good man. That was not a problem that was ever had by his friend William Theodore Roosevelt. That it was never had by his distant acquaintance and sometimes enemy Henry Adams. It wasn't had by a whole bunch of people in his time period in that wonderful, wonderful Gilded Age. But it was true of him. His inner deliberation got the best of him when he was writing fair copies of stuff that was then going to get typed and printed and whatnot. And unfortunately, that's true in present day problems. I'm not saying that this is a riveting reading by any means. Ex-presidents write all sorts of books. They range all over the map, from boring to fascinating. This is closer to the boring end of the spectrum, although there are bits and pieces in it that are of interest. Like, for instance, I picked a spot where Taft is writing about the possibility of an income tax. A graduated income tax would have a tendency to reduce the motive for the accumulation of enormous wealth or the spending of that wealth on buying senators to make loopholes. But the Supreme Court has held an income tax not to be a valid exercise of power by the federal government. The objection to it, from a practical standpoint, is its inquisitorial character and the premium it puts on perjury. In times of great national need, however, an income tax would be of great assistance in furnishing means to carry on the government, and is not free from doubt how the Supreme Court, with changed membership, would view a new income tax law under such conditions. And now, of course, that doubt is removed, because we know that's all it took was to change the people, and you change the law. And this book has tidbits like that throughout it that will have an extra resonance for 21st century, because we know what Taft did when he was writing these things. Unfortunately, this is not the ideal version of this book. The ideal version of this book would have Mark Sullivan or whoever, somebody from the crowd who's writing for a newspaper and jobbing readable prose, would preface each one of these things with a vignette of what it was like to be at the event, and maybe to talk to the guest of honor before he gave the speech or right after, and get a taste of the man himself. These speeches, prefaced or footnoted by details like that, would come alive a lot more than they do on the page. If you're listening to Taft write about tariff reform, and then you get a footnote saying that when he got off stage, he said, well, that flopped. You might like the writing a little better, because the writing is unfailingly intelligent. Who knows? One way or another, that's your book for today. It's Present Day Problems by William Howard Taft. It's not in print. It's not going to be in print anymore. There's never going to be a Library of America volume of the writings of William Howard Taft. Nevertheless, I have it, and I rather like it. And at least I do the courtesy of not reading the excerpt in his voice. So that we're going to wrap this up for now, but oh, don't you worry, there are plenty more books to come, and some of them may even be interesting. Thank you, BookTube.